Ladies and gentlemen, joining me on the line, he's our buddy and pal from the San Diego Union Tribune. Ladies and gentlemen, Bryce Miller's on the line. Hey, bud, what's up?
Hey, how are you? Good to hear from you.
I know, right? The last time we talked was you talking about Hank Aaron, I believe. It was that or Field of Dreams? Which one was it?
I think you were calling about Field of Dreams stuff at that point.
Yeah.
It was a little before that game.
It's so either way, it's been a while is what we're getting at here.
Yeah.
And the reason we got you on today, Bryce, you're let's face it, you're heavily into baseball. Last night the lockout happened, and it's a lockout that I hadn't seen a lot of news or coverage about. But all of a sudden, ESPN and everything else pops up. Baseball is locked out for the next season, or at least possibly for the season, but locked out at the moment. What's going on?
So out here in San Diego at the San Diego Union Tribune, we care about the Padres, obviously, but this is a machine with 30 moving parts, 30 franchises, and they're all represented on one side of the table by owners, and on the other side of the table are all those players. And it's been more than 26 years since they've had a strike or a lockout or anything that threatened the season. And so it's been a long time, more than a quarter of a century since we've been in the spot. It's all wrapped and tangled with something called the collective bargaining agreement, which basically over time, the last one went into effect in 2017, but it sets the financial and operational rules of baseball related to players and salaries and contracts and all the business of baseball. And, they had avoided something like this for a long, long time. But I think the thing that's changed is potentially the money, the balance of revenue in baseball, which used to be close to 50-50. And now I forget the newest numbers, but it's inched towards like 53% owners or 47% players, something like that, maybe even a little more. And the players are trying to really go back and trying to create that balance, especially since baseball's back to 162 game seasons and robust TV contracts. And there's a lot of money there. And owners also benefit from the valuations of franchises, which go through the roof. That's not money you have in your pocket now, but if you ever intend to sell or do anything else related to the value of your franchise, they're in a better position every single year than the year before. I thought it was interesting. The Associated Press reported, like in the first season of that CBA in 2017, the average salary of players was like $4.1 million. And this season, it's expected to be around 3.7. So actually going down is interesting. And I know some people go, well, 2020, the pandemic, 60 games, but you're talking about the cost of the game related to what you pay players is going down, which is not really the trend line in any other area. So that's the footing of this thing. But they're arguing about all kinds of things. They're arguing about service time. Everybody probably in Iowa remembers the Chris Bryant thing with the Cubs, where they delayed the start of a season basically to guarantee they would get another full season with Bryant under baseball minimums as opposed to him reaching free agency sooner and having a chance to make money sooner. The Padres actually went the other way with their star, Fernando Tatis Jr. at shortstop. When they brought him up, I don't think anybody would have blamed them for delaying his start with the big club to do the other thing, to do that same thing, to get another year out of him. But really what it turned into is they thought, we want this guy around for a long time. When we negotiate the big contract, we want him to remember that we didn't manipulate his service time like the Cubs did with Chris Bryant. And so anyway, they're arguing about all of that, and but the impasse and the inability to settle some of these core issues led to the first lockout in, as I said, more than 26 years.
Bryce Miller from the San Diego Union Tribune on the line with me, talking about the baseball lockout that happened last night and in effect right now, essentially. Bryce, this is going to sound like a kind of a stupid question, but I hopefully it's not as stupid as it sounds. How is baseball in general making money? Because you heard a couple of years ago the NBA got this huge deal where everybody was getting a ton of money. The NFL year after year is bringing in money. And baseball seems like they've had trouble keeping fans interested and that sort of thing. How are they on the money front?
Well, TV contracts float most boats.
Yeah.
That's where big money's at. You see, from the days I was growing up in Iowa, you didn't have as many channels, as many options, which means you didn't have as much competitive bidding on TV contracts for live sports. You didn't have Fox Sports, which has jumped in to be such a big player and when you watch the baseball playoffs, they've got a huge chunk of that postseason under their roof. So you've got more competition on the TV dollar contract side, and they're paying a lot of money for live sports events, and that fuels a ton.
Okay.
But also the number of games they play matters. 2020 certainly impacted everybody. Salaries were prorated to the number of games they played. Owners couldn't recoup that money because they didn't have as many home games.
Yeah.
But going back to 162 probably was the lifeline baseball needed. But the other side, so when you get that amount of home games, 81, it's everything. It's a plus multiplier. You're getting concessions, you're getting parking, you're getting merchandise sales, and on and on and on. So baseball on the ownership side is fine. So that's where they make the money, those two areas in particular. But there's also licensing, and then you get into a deeper dive into where baseball makes its money. But they certainly do, and the TV contracts are the biggest piece.
Okay. My next question with this, that there always seems to be like the good guy side to these things and the bad guy side to this. In kind of your view, who's the good guy and who's the bad guy here?
Well, I will say that most people would I'm gonna pick apart your question first.
Okay.
Then I'll answer.
Okay, I don't want to put you in. I know you got to work with some of these teams, so I don't want to put you in a bad position. But I mean, there is usually like, the greedy players or greedy ownership. There's always that conversation in this, and that's what I'm curious about.
Yeah, I'm not worried about what the owners or players with the Padres say, to be honest. But I just think the premise of the question needs a little nuance, and here's why. I think most people think they're both the bad guys.
Okay.
Because there's so much money in baseball. The ownership clearly, which we found this out with the NFL and St. Louis and that $790 million settlement agreement with the NFL and the Rams. Part of why they agreed to such a big number is, without a doubt, they didn't want to open up their books and reveal, which in court proceedings they were being asked to do that. And I don't think anybody on the ownership side really wanted to show how much money NFL owners and teams have. That's one we like to keep under the rug, because that's a negotiating tool when they go through their own labor contracts. Baseball's a lot the same way. They're not interested in opening up their books in any real way to show the business side of it. So then the players. I mean, when somebody said, I just said this, but when you say an average salary went down in 4 years from $4.1 million to $3.7 million, you don't get a lot of people earning, working hard for a living. It's expensive to go to a ballpark. You're going to feel sorry for a guy making $3.7 million a year.
True.
Just on the surface, I think they all come out looking like bad guys in situations like this. But I think the reality is it's a little easier to understand the player side of it. I talked about that imbalance in revenue sharing, which is leaned towards owners recently. So there's that. But at the same time, if you think about it, players have a limited time to make money. Now, we all agree they make enough money, although baseball minimums, I forget what the new number is. It used to be fairly recently, like 500 and some thousand a season for rookies. Fernando Tatis was making that. But for the most part, a lot of guys making into millions. What if they're a pitcher and they have a Tommy John surgery and it's over? They had one season and they didn't make the big money. Whereas these ownership groups, the valuations on franchises are going up. They're making money year after year. TV contracts continue to rise. You factored all that in, they continue to make money as long as they own that franchise. And they're probably handing off, if they don't cash in, probably handing it off to their family and the next generation. So they have unlimited earning potential compared to players. And so I think that's a difference. Those two reasons.
Okay.
I think if you're going to lean toward a side and not just say they all make a ton of money and I don't like any of it, I would probably lean a little bit in the players' direction for those two reasons.
Gotcha. Bryce Miller from the San Diego Union Tribune on the line with me. All right, how does this wrap up? What do you think is going to happen here?
Well, it's just going to be a big mess for a while. Because,
awesome.
Yeah, it's going to be a mess.
Let me rephrase.
Well, I was only going to ask,
is there going to be a season?
Oh, yeah. Both sides have too much at stake. There's too much money on the table, especially one season removed from a 60-game season during the coronavirus pandemic. So yeah, they'll sort it out. Do they miss some of the season? That's a different question. I think that's possible.
Okay.
I did see, I think it was Commissioner Manfred. I was going through a transcript and I think he said this, but essentially with the labor history. 1994, when they went on strike, that's a big one here because with the Padres, Tony Gwynn was hitting 394, and he's the last person who legitimately had a chance to hit 400 in a season. No one's really approached it in a meaningful way late in the season since. It's like immortalized in a beer out here. There's a beer called 394 just based on that.
That's awesome.
But that was the strike. Yeah, so that's a little trivia. But that was the strike season, and it did real damage to the game. So they know they don't want to damage the season, or at least limit that damage. And Manfred had mentioned that they wanted the lockout soon, not wait, not risk a strike later, because if they're gonna wrestle at the negotiating table, they want as many days in the off season to do it. Because really the thing both sides need is to protect the season. That's where the money's at. So it'll get ugly. There'll be posturing. Saw some of the comments from Max Scherzer about teams tanking, and his super agent Scott Boras talking about nobody's paying the middle class player because of the rules of baseball now and the strategies of, about rebuilding as opposed to going for a championship now is to shed big payroll, and then as you rebuild with your system and amateurs, pay younger guys who make less money. But then when teams get close, they buy a Max Scherzer or a Marcus Stroman, or I'm thinking guys who went this week, Corey Seager, Marcus Semien. There were a ton of big money moves, but it was all at the top. So the argument is about who really, if you're either looking to trim payroll or make the big spend to try to get over the top, who's getting the guy who's a $4.2 million outfielder. So there is kind of a baseball middle class right now created by the current system, and that's a huge one they're trying to address on the player side, just because you're either all in or you're all out. Financially, it's one side or the other, and there's not much of a middle. And I think there's some truth to that, but that's what you get into. But they really want to sort that. But all of them have one goal that is common. They need to protect the season.
Gotcha. Bryce Miller from the San Diego Union Tribune on the line with me. One final question. I'm going to shift gears on you just because you're an Iowa guy. You excited for that Big Ten championship game this weekend?
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting. I think a lot of people think Michigan will just walk away, but just think a week earlier. That's what Ohio State was supposed to do to Michigan. Now, that game was on the road, and it wasn't in great conditions, and Michigan played extremely well, and I think the country saw that defense is maybe a lot better than people thought, and Ohio State showed that its defense is, fallible, and especially, once you get in the defensive backfield thing. But Iowa plays solid defense. If they don't give up a couple big plays early, I think they'll be in this game, But the other factor is Michigan coming off just a huge win that changed everything for them. Is that high linger a week? He'll never say it. For Jim Harbaugh, that was the win he had to have. He's never beaten Ohio State. So for a bunch of reasons, I think most of America who's not involved, doesn't know much about the programs, but just sees records and rankings and just beat Ohio State. I think this thing is a runway. And who knows, Michigan could do that. But, the history of things, Iowa keeps it close with that defense. They have the most interceptions in the country, I think by a fairly wide margin still, but at least I know they lead the country, which can flip a game. They got a great punter, good kicker. They're just like, that's team fundamentals. That's what Iowa kind of is. Their whole thing is, can they move the ball offensively?
Yeah, that's going to be
especially against that defense. So Iowa needs a low-scoring game. They need this thing to be like 17-14. If it gets up into the, if this is 30s kind of football, I don't think they can play Michigan in that environment. But but no, if you're Iowa, after losing to Purdue, picking up a couple of losses there, to think you found a way into the Big Ten championship game, I don't think anybody from Iowa is going to turn that down.
Oh, absolutely not. It should be fun. And historically, Iowa usually plays Michigan pretty well, so I'm excited. Yeah. So, hey, one other question for you real quick, just because you're out there.
Sure.
I know San Diego isn't right next to Los Angeles, but what was the word about Lincoln Riley making his way out there?
Yeah, it's interesting. That's one of those hires that kind of transcends geography. Like the whole country was kind of talking about it. Just so many layers of that are interesting to me. Is a guy like Lincoln Riley who, built something in the Midwest, how does he fit into LA and Hollywood? And it's a very different, like, booster donor group pressure when you're at a place like USC. The history there and just the condition they're in, and where you're like Pete Carroll felt like a perfect fit at USC because he kind of had that charisma.
Yeah,
he could do the LA thing, whatever that means. But maybe they've went that route a lot. Maybe they need somebody who can just dial into fundamental football. and maybe Lincoln Riley can ignore all that noise. But USC essentially, the statement was, we're trying to win right now. We went out and got our version of a rock star. But the other layer that I think is kind of fascinating, did Lincoln Riley want to get off the bus before they got to the SEC? Because I think especially for Texas and maybe to a degree Oklahoma, they left a conference they were really competitive in, Oklahoma especially. I think they're going to have a lot of seasons, Texas in particular, we're going to finish mid-pack, and that's not going to play well in Texas with that donor group. So did he kind of get out of that mess before they switched over to the SEC? I mean, there's more TV money, and the money would have been there, but competitively that could have felt a lot different. Who knows? But yeah, that was a big one.
Hey, was there any worry, because everybody always has like the Matt Campbell or this guy or that guy or whatever. Was Lincoln Riley ever even mentioned in that vein for that job?
Oh,
was there a rumor like, oh, we might get Lincoln Riley or No. Okay.
Not that I know of.
Okay.
If there was, I didn't see it.
Okay, cool. Bryce Miller from the San Diego Union Tribune. Thank you so much, man. It's good talking to you again.
Great to talk to you, B-sox. Have a great holiday.
Thank you, buddy. You too.